In Los Angeles, a band of gunmen invade an armored car company. They grab millions and then vanish. When the FBI does find suspects, insufficient evidence prevents their arrest. Agents and detectives try to penetrate the gunmen's secretive world to bring them to justice.
An armed robbery is a terrifying ordeal. When a gang descended on a Los Angeles cash vault, they threatened to kill anyone who resisted. The violent assault was the largest heist in U.S. history, and a piece of plastic was the only evidence. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI, LAPD, and the IRS joined forces to unravel a complex network of money laundering, fraud, and a tight code of silence.
The Los Angeles warehouse district is a tough, bleak part of town. Street gangs and violence are common. The area's businesses are housed in nondescript buildings, many surrounded by barbed wire fences. One secure block was occupied by a leading armored car company. Friday night, September 13th, 1997. Employees of the armored car company were going about their routine, counting and sorting over $20 million. The money would be dispersed to automated teller machines across Los Angeles to meet the weekend demand for cash. There were 5 employees, including 2 security guards working the graveyard shift. At 12:30 a.m., one guard took his break in the lunchroom, as he did every night. But he wasn't alone.
Hands up, on the floor, now! We got one, we got security!
Five armed men subdued the guard in seconds.
Go! Let's go!
They dragged their hostage into an office where security monitors were kept. Then a second security guard, preparing to go home for the night, entered. Unarmed and out of uniform, he offered no resistance. Four of the assailants headed for the cash vault. The fifth held the guards at gunpoint and monitored the security cameras. The employees in the vault prep area were unaware that the building was under siege. The gunmen threatened to shoot if anyone disobeyed orders or made any sudden moves. The thieves now had direct access to the vault and its $20 million.
Put your head down! Get that head down, number 3, stay on the work.
One man appeared to be in charge, barking orders to his accomplices.
No, don't touch that. This bin over here. This one right here. Number 5, everything's on schedule.
He also used a concealed radio headset to direct others somewhere outside the vault. When commanding his men, the leader didn't use names, only a numbered code. The robbers were coldly efficient, wasting no movement. In less than 10 minutes, they wheeled millions to the loading dock.
No, this one right here. Right here, right here. Face down! Number 6, come on up, we're ready.
In the outer office, the gunman removed the surveillance recorder bolted to a desk. Seconds later, employees heard more destruction in the back office. When the leader and another man returned, the employees no doubt feared it was to eliminate witnesses. But the assailants only stole the vault manager's pickup truck keys. Suddenly, it was quiet. Believing the gunman had fled, the guards risked freeing themselves.
Hold up, Johnson. I'll help you out in a minute.
They called 911. LAPD officers were immediately dispatched to the scene.
Okay, hold on. We're going to go down there right now.
Detective John Licata knew the case was unusual from the beginning.
We have experienced armored car robberies where the couriers or the truck are attacked. Robbery, homicide. But this was the first time we've ever had a facility hit.
Officers secured the crime scene, and detectives began interviewing the employees. They said the 5 assailants seemed to move through the facility as if they had been there before. They didn't see them leave, but they heard the sound of a diesel engine pulling into, then out of the loading area. A 6th assailant must have been driving. One employee thought she recognized the voice of one of the gunmen as that of a former armored car driver for the company. She agreed to come to the station in the morning to study a photo lineup of former employees.
What's your name, sir?
Detectives spoke with the vault manager whose personal pickup truck and keys had been stolen. They wondered why his keys were taken and not the others. The manager said he parked in the same spot each night.
None of the suspects had asked him what the vehicle looked like. That led us to believe that whoever took his keys and had taken his vehicle knew him and his vehicle.
The manager agreed one of the men's voices was familiar, but he couldn't think of a name. He said he would contact them if it came to him. Forensic technicians took impressions of the facility's door locks. Initially, damage found on the doors and locks suggested the thieves used force to gain entry. But later examination by technicians in the police lab proved otherwise.
There was damage to the locks and the mechanisms, but not to the degree that it would have caused them to malfunction and to open.
They believed the gunman had used a key, then faked signs of forced entry. Company officials later estimated the loss at a staggering $18.9 million. The robbers knew what to take and what to leave behind.
All of the high cash bins, those bins that contained large amounts of cash, were taken. Those that didn't, that contained stamps and cash checks, were not taken.
This suggested that the assailants knew how the company stored its cash. The robbers also appeared to know where the company had installed its video surveillance recorders, including a backup machine that was hidden inside a locked cabinet in the back office. Employees had heard the assailants destroy the lock to get to the backup VCR.
The recording devices were kept in a cabinet, inaccessible to most employees. We interviewed all the facility employees, and 80% of them didn't know about the recording devices in the back office.
Investigators processed the loading area for any evidence of shoe prints, tire tracks, or clothing fibers. They found none. But they did discover what appeared to be a broken truck reflector or lens cover.
I personally spoke with the maintenance person that had cleaned the facility earlier in the day, and he assured me that that lens would have had to have been left there sometime in the evening. So it was surmised by us that it probably was left by the suspect's vehicle. We didn't have a lot of clues as to what the vehicle would be, other than that reflector that was recovered, and we didn't know if it was a common item taken off of trucks or vehicles.
Since the money stolen from the facility was federally insured, the FBI joined the investigation. Special Agent John McCarran from the Los Angeles field office studied a crime scene video made by the Los Angeles police that detailed the sequence of the gunman's activities during the robbery.
And put them in this room here. This door is unlocked. They laid both victims down on the floor here, and they also removed their keys. Once they did that,
The 5 masked gunmen had pulled off the largest cash heist in U.S. history.
guard these two.
Agent McCarran hoped the public could help find them.
They also removed their keys.
The media was given general descriptions of the individuals that committed the robbery as far as height and weight and clothing, and the fact that the individuals were all armed, and there was a posting of a reward at the time.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager hoped the vague descriptions would be enough to produce a lead.
The victims told us that they believed that the robbers were black, and that was based on the skin color that they saw through the eye holes of the mask. And they also told us that one of the robbers appeared to be lighter skinned, and he may be Hispanic. They were not able to see anybody's face.
But they had heard voices. At LAPD headquarters, one of the armored car company employees was shown a photo lineup.
Look at some photos and see if we can finger this guy. Okay? Take your time.
The woman believed she had recognized the voice of one of the robbers.
Don't rush. Take your time.
Now she was trying to match his voice to a face.
But here.
The lineup consisted of pictures of policemen mixed with several former armored car drivers and security officers. She picked one former driver as a possible match to the voice she heard on the night of the robbery.
This guy?
Yes. Wore glasses.
Police learned that the man had recently left LA for New Orleans. Agents from the FBI's New Orleans field office approached the former armored car driver at his family's home there.
Fine. I'm Agent Marks from the FBI. Is my partner. Is there a problem? No problem.
He said he was unaware that the company had been robbed and was willing to cooperate.
So why not? Come on in. Sure.
Sit down in here.
He said that he had left his job on good terms a few weeks before the robbery.
It turned out that he was out of town on vacation during the robbery, and the agents were able to corroborate his statements about being out of town.
Thank you very much.
On the night of the robbery in Los Angeles, the man was 1,900 miles away in Louisiana.
Gentlemen, have a nice day. Thanks a lot.
So he was ruled out as a suspect.
Despite the false lead, investigators still believed the robbery had been an inside job. But whoever the gunmen were, they left little behind. And with $18.9 million in their hands, they could be anywhere. In September 1997, the FBI and the LAPD were unable to identify any of the 6 masked men who had robbed an armored car company of nearly $19 million. They believed at least one was a current or former employee, since the gang entered the building with a key and knew where hidden surveillance equipment was.
You made mention at the scene.
In his second interview, the vault manager on duty during the heist realized he recognized the voice of the lead gunman.
Plus, he just got let go, too, so maybe he's
He believed the man was Alan Pace, a former company employee. He thought Pace was one of the 2 gunmen who stole the keys to his pickup truck. Pace was familiar with the truck and had asked to borrow it before.
He would be the one to know what type of truck I drive.
FBI Special Agent John McCarran studied Pace's employment history.
Alan Pace was an employee who had worked for the company for approximately a year and a half. He was actually suspended the day prior to the robbery.
28-year-old Alan Pace had no criminal record, but when the company suspended him for disciplinary reasons, he had not turned in his keys. Investigators went to interview Pace at his home in Los Angeles.
Alan Pace.
Pace told them he knew about the robbery through the media, but assured the agents that he had nothing to do with the heist. He said he was at a party with his girlfriend on the night of the crime. He gave them her address and phone number. Investigators needed to verify Pace's alibi. They called in for a background check on the girlfriend. Detective John Licata learned she was a former employee too.
Mr. Pace's girlfriend worked in the facility in the cash vault area and specifically had a position that required her to handle the security video equipment. She had been terminated approximately 4 weeks prior to the robbery.
Investigators asked Pace's girlfriend about the night of the robbery. She confirmed that on that night, Pace and several of his friends attended an all-night party in Long Beach. She and Pace stayed at the party through the early morning hours of the following day. And there were plenty of witnesses who saw them there. Though suspicious, Pace's alibi was corroborated, and it was enough to block investigators temporarily. They would need a different tack to keep the case moving forward.
Yeah, John Licata here. How you doing?
The only
just
physical
got back in the
evidence
office.
was a cracked amber lens found at the crime scene.
We're going to
They
take that
believed it came
lens
from a diesel truck used as one of the getaway vehicles.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you then. Bye-bye.
They needed to find that truck.
I got the assistance of some of my partners and half a dozen of us for the next 5 evenings between the hours of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Went to the location of where the armored car facility was and interviewed anyone that frequented the area either on foot or in a vehicle.
A week after the robbery, they patrolled the warehouse district near the scene of the crime. After several nights, they found a homeless man who lived on the streets in the area.
A few questions. What's your name?
Henry.
Henry. Henry, is this where you stay?
He said that on the night the robbery took place, he saw a mid-size rental truck idling near the armored car company.
What kind of truck?
It sounded like a diesel.
Big white truck?
He noticed it that night because usually there was little business or late-night traffic in the area. But he didn't see the driver. He'd never seen the truck there before or since.
Take care of yourself, Henry.
All right, sir.
The description of the diesel rental truck fit the victim's statements that they heard a diesel truck in the company loading area. Investigators suspected that the amber lens found in the loading area had fallen off that truck. Teams of agents and detectives canvassed facilities in the Los Angeles area that rented diesel trucks. They showed employees a photo of the partial lens found at the crime scene. Several recognized the lens as the type used on the running lights for a certain model of truck. The lenses were a problem because they frequently fell off and needed to be replaced.
There were 83 rental truck facilities that rented the truck that the lens most likely came off of. We subpoenaed documents from all the rental vehicles that they had rented 2 months prior to the robbery for a period of time 2 months after the robbery.
Investigators spent hours poring through the rental records. But there were no rentals by Alan Pace or his girlfriend. It looked like another dead end. Authorities contacted Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager for legal advice on how to proceed.
You can't just go get a warrant because somebody's a suspect and you think that they did a crime. You have to have evidence that they committed the crime. Alan Pace had denied any involvement in the robbery and had even claimed that he was at another place. He had an alibi, which witnesses that we spoke to corroborated. So at that point in time, all we had was the fact that he was a disgruntled employee who had been fired the day before the robbery, and one of the employees believed that one of the robbers had a voice that was similar to his. And that clearly was not enough evidence.
To find out more, the FBI and LAPD began watching the former armored car company employee. If Pace was involved in the multi-million-dollar robbery, he might show signs of his newfound wealth.
We did do surveillance of Mr. Pace, and he did not appear to be living beyond his means. He didn't appear to be spending a lot of money. He didn't appear to have a lot of cash at his disposal.
Nothing implicated Pace in the robbery beyond the circumstantial evidence they already had. As the months passed, there was little movement on the case. The reward for information leading to a conviction now totaled $250,000.
Despite the extensive media publicity this case received and the rewards for any information about the perpetrators of this robbery, there were absolutely no leads, no forensic evidence, no eyewitnesses. The investigation just came to a grinding halt.
Though Pace was still the primary suspect, without more substantial evidence, the FBI was unable to make an arrest. For now, it appeared that Alan Pace and 5 accomplices had gotten away with nearly $19 million in cash. By September of 1998, a full year had passed since 6 masked gunmen made off with almost $19 million. The prime suspect was Alan Pace, a former armored car company employee, suspended the day before the crime. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager was frustrated by the lack of evidence against Pace.
It didn't appear that he was out there spending money. It didn't appear that he had the fruits of the crime. So there really wasn't any legal basis to go out and arrest him or even to search his house.
Then, press coverage of the one-year anniversary of the crime prompted a lead for case agent John McCarran. An informant called the FBI, saying he thought he might know one of the robbers. Investigators went to the informant's home in suburban Los Angeles. The informant explained he had been an employee of the armored car company a year earlier, around the time of the robbery. He had since left to become a real estate agent. He claimed that shortly after the robbery, he was given $100,000 in cash to purchase a home for a man he knew, Eugene Hill. Hill asked that the deed to the home be listed in the name of his girlfriend. At his girlfriend's apartment, Hill stored a trunk filled with smaller boxes. He gave one of the boxes to the informant. It contained cash, still bundled by bank wrappers, totaling $100,000.
The informant, when he received the money, noticed that the $10,000 bundles had these bank straps on them. He kept those bank straps.
They were dated the 2 days prior to the heist.
We were able to later determine the paper-type wrappers actually came from some of the money stolen from the armored car company.
The informant said Hill changed his mind and asked for the money back, but in cashier's checks, not cash. The informant had kept $15,000, and Hill had recently begun threatening him. He hoped the FBI could protect him. Eugene Hill had no criminal record and had never worked at the armored car company. But a background check revealed Hill had a connection with prime suspect Alan Pace. Both had worked for another security agency in Los Angeles. Investigators began surveillance on Hill. At one point, they followed him to a business named Extreme Entertainment. The company billed itself as an entertainment service that provided everything from children's games to exotic dancers. Business records revealed that Eugene Hill was a partner in the company, along with Alan Pace. Investigators suspected that Extreme Entertainment was likely established to launder money from the robbery.
The Internal Revenue Service was brought on board and supplied with information from records and documents which would assist us in preparing money laundering charges against some of these individuals.
The investigative team learned more about the company. Besides Alan Pace and Eugene Hill, Extreme Entertainment listed 2 other men as partners, Terry Brown and Fred McCrary. The 4 had worked together at the same LA security agency before Alan Pace was hired at the armored car company. Extreme Entertainment's accounting books looked suspicious to Los Angeles IRS Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Philip Mullins.
There were 4 suspected robbers involved in Extreme Entertainment. Extreme Entertainment wasn't really generating very much income, but there was a lot of cash going through the business, into the bank accounts, and then a lot of money being paid out in salaries.
Investigators began to dig deeper into the financial backgrounds of the 4 partners. They subpoenaed bank statements, credit card reports, and tax returns. In the personal bank records of Eugene Hill, they found the suspect had a second source of income.
One of the things that we discovered were deposits of checks from a company called Rainforest. Now, we'd never heard of Rainforest, and we didn't know what kind of company it was, so we went and looked at the Rainforest bank records. And we found that in addition to writing regular monthly checks to Eugene Hill, Rainforest was also writing checks on a regular basis to somebody named Thomas Johnson.
Like Hill, Thomas Johnson's position at Rainforest was listed as a consultant. It was unclear what type of consultants they were. Rainforest was in business developing new recycling technologies. Johnson and Hill had invested $2 million in the company. The investment in a legitimate company was a classic money laundering scheme.
You take bad money, you invest it in something, you hide it, conceal it, and ultimately end up with something that looks legitimate.
Investigators felt confident that the 5 men were strong suspects, but so far, no evidence connected them directly to the $18.9 million robbery. LAPD Detective John Licata and his partner, Detective John Wong, cross-referenced the suspects' names against truck rental records from the time of the robbery.
Sure, that'd be fine.
Detective Wong made an important discovery.
My partner, John Wong, is the one that found the rental agreement from one of the suspects, Eugene Hill, in which he had rented the suspect's vehicle that was used that night just prior to the robbery and then returned just after the robbery.
We were able to locate that very truck. It was still in the Los Angeles area. And we got that truck and we removed the light assembly and had the FBI forensics lab compare it to the lens that was found on the loading dock area.
They needed to know if the amber lens had fallen off that truck. While waiting for the lab results, investigators looked further into suspect Thomas Johnson. Johnson lived in an expensive home in an upscale Las Vegas neighborhood.
The IRS conducted surveillance of his residence, and during that period of time, his girlfriend at the time was identified.
Agents flagged the girlfriend's name. If Vegas police ran into her, they should call LA. On the night of September 10th, 1999, nearly 2 years to the day after the robbery, the team in LA got a call and boarded a helicopter. There had been a domestic disturbance at Thomas Johnson's Las Vegas home. Johnson's girlfriend had called the police. They hoped to use the disturbance call as an opportunity to question the girlfriend. She alleged that Johnson had beaten her. She was more than willing to answer any questions they had about him. She said Johnson was laundering money through the Las Vegas casinos. He and a friend would buy thousands of dollars in chips that he would later have her exchange for cash. The exchange was always in amounts less than $10,000 to avoid filling out cash reports.
Thomas Johnson appeared to be very fond of gambling and appeared to have a lot of money with which to gamble. And it's a little tricky when you do these types of investigations because you don't know where that money is coming from, if it's perhaps gambling winnings that are then being used to conduct more gambling activities, or if it's perhaps what we thought, which was money from the robbery.
The girlfriend told investigators Johnson had mentioned a big job that he had taken part in back in Los Angeles. She said Johnson had invested in a company with a gambling friend. When investigators showed her a photo of Eugene Hill, she confirmed that he was Johnson's friend. The circumstantial evidence against Thomas Johnson, Alan Pace, and Eugene Hill was building. But it was still not enough to make any arrests. Agents would need to turn the suspects against one another if there was to be any hope of convictions.
Hands up! On the floor now!
2 years after 6 masked gunmen robbed an armored car company of $18.9 million, the FBI, IRS, and LAPD had gathered strong circumstantial evidence against 5 suspects, but had nothing that directly tied the men to the crime.
30, 35, 40.
The only physical evidence recovered was a cracked amber lens found in the loading area of the armored car company. Investigators believe the lens fell off a truck rented by suspect Eugene Hill the day before the robbery. They sent the broken lens and the other lenses from the truck's running lights to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. Forensic metallurgist Michael Smith compared tool marks from the broken lens to those on the other lenses from the truck.
In this case, the marks look rather like the rings on a tree, and we attempt to see whether those marks line up or not.
Using a high-powered comparison microscope, he made an exact match. The same tool had made all the lenses in the same work session, indicating the broken lens had very likely come from the truck rented by Hill. The forensics results were compelling, but they did not definitively prove that Eugene Hill or the other 4 suspects were with the truck during the robbery. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager needed stronger evidence before authorizing arrests. She hoped Hill's girlfriends would provide it.
We had identified 2 of his girlfriends who also appeared to be spending not large amounts, but amounts of cash. Approximately 2 years after the robbery, we had gotten to the point where we needed to talk to these women that were in Eugene Hill's life.
We're gonna need your cooperation.
Worried that charges might be filed against her, one of Hill's girlfriends rolled, telling investigators what she knew. She told them that after the date of the robbery, Hill suddenly had a lot of cash. She said Hill stored 2 footlockers filled with boxes of the cash in her apartment. She and a friend helped him count and sort thousands. Hill told her that before the new crisp bills could be spent, they needed to look worn. So she washed them. Usually, Thomas Johnson took part in the operation. She said they would go to Las Vegas, buy gambling chips with the washed bills, and then turn them in for new cash. Her story corroborated the statement previously given by Johnson's girlfriend. In return for her testimony, prosecutors agreed not to file charges against her. Next, FBI agents and LAPD detectives wanted to talk to Eugene Hill's sister. They had some questions about bank accounts the IRS had uncovered.
We were able to subpoena her records and determine that she had several accounts that she was holding in trust for Eugene Hill. Those records showed that there were a lot of unexplained cash deposits into those records, and it also appeared that checks were being written for motorcycles and vehicles and other consumer goods. So now we had a little bit more indication that Eugene Hill was perhaps spending money that he really couldn't explain receiving.
She agreed to talk to the investigators, but said she first needed to make a phone call. She stepped away and appeared to send a numeric page. Investigators asked her about the accounts she held for her brother. She was evasive and claimed to be unaware of any of her brother's financial matters. Moments after the phone call, Eugene Hill arrived.
Mr. Hill, how are you tonight?
When questioned, Hill denied any knowledge of the armored car company robbery. He told investigators that he didn't have time to answer their questions then, but he would meet them the next morning at their office. Loaded with cash, Hill was a significant flight risk. The FBI called Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager for advice.
I was just getting ready for bed. The phone rang at home, and the agent said, this is what Mr. Hill wants to do. Should we let him go? And it was just one of those split-second, decisions that had to be made. And I made the decision that we were not going to let Eugene Hill go. We were going to arrest him that night.
As Hill was heading back to his car, he was placed under arrest. With only circumstantial evidence connecting him to the robbery, it was a risk. The law requires an expeditious trial, and the clock had begun to tick. On September 23, 1999, the FBI arrested Eugene Hill, one of 5 men suspected in an armored car company heist. Assistant U.S. Attorney Alka Sager had made the decision to arrest Hill, despite having only circumstantial evidence linking him to the crime.
By letting Hill go, there was a real danger that he would have alerted the others to the investigation. Given the amount of money that was taken in this robbery, it was apparent that these robbers would have the means to flee if they wanted to. And I just felt we couldn't take that chance.
A search of Hill's home provided no solid evidence tying Hill to the robbery. But investigators did discover ledgers that showed Hill had purchased real estate in other people's names. Prime suspect Alan Pace was also listed on Hill's ledgers as having purchased real estate in others' names. Finally, IRS agent Philip Mullins had something on Pace.
This was very significant in that there was over $1 million worth of real estate purchased for Alan Pace, that he had no legitimate source of income to purchase that property.
If convicted, Eugene Hill was facing up to 40 years in prison. Hoping for sentencing consideration, he confessed and promised to tell police everything he knew.
Who's this Alan
He said Alan Pace recruited him and 3 others for the robbery.
Alan Pace told him that he had already spoken to Terry Brown and Freddie McCrary, and they were ready to do the job, and he wanted Eugene Hill to come on board and maybe bring another person in. So Eugene Hill approached Thomas Johnson, who agreed to participate, and that's where the plan was hatched.
Hill confirmed Pace was the mastermind of the heist and leader of the gang. Hill knew all of the men except for the 6th, who was a personal friend of Pace's. Pace told the others his plan could set them up for life.
5 to 6 employees at most.
Alan Pace told them that they would do the robbery on Friday night when there would be very few employees working there. He said that he knew who those employees were, that they wouldn't offer any resistance, and that it wouldn't be a problem. They would just tie up the employees, take the money, and they'd be in and out, within half an hour.
Following orders, Hill rented the diesel truck on the day of the robbery and met up with the gang at the party in Long Beach. Shortly before midnight, they left the party one by one. They drove to the warehouse district. Then 5 walked to the armored car company. During the robbery, one man stayed with the truck, waiting a few blocks away for the call to pull in. When the truck arrived, they loaded it up. Pace knew to take the surveillance equipment. They later transferred the money to a storage unit rented by Thomas Johnson, where it remained for 2 weeks. 4 of them left in the rental truck. Eugene Hill and Alan Pace drove away in the vault manager's pickup, since Pace knew where he parked each night. The 6 men disposed of the guns and VCRs, changed their clothes, and returned to the party as if nothing had happened. In the time it took others at the party to drink a couple more beers, the gang had committed the largest armed robbery in U.S. history. Investigators needed to corroborate Eugene Hill's story. FBI Special Agent John McCarran and his team believed Thomas Johnson should be the next one taken.
Agents in our Las Vegas field office were conducting surveillance on Thomas Johnson, and we knew his exact location. We followed him from one of the casinos.
Agents tailed Johnson as he visited several casinos. They did not know if the suspect was armed. To execute a safe arrest, agents needed to isolate Johnson outside and away from the casino crowd. They asked a casino security guard to approach him with a ruse. The guard told Johnson his car had been hit and that he needed to go outside to fill out a report. Johnson took the bait. As he checked his car, agents safely took him into custody. Investigators laid out the case against him and the possibility of decades in prison. Like Eugene Hill, Johnson cooperated in the hopes of a lighter sentence. Johnson verified Hill's version of the robbery and confirmed that Alan Pace was the leader. Investigators finally had sufficient evidence. They quickly arrested everyone but the leader.
We knew that Pace was aware of the earlier arrest of the other individuals. There was a warrant for his arrest, and he contacted me here at my office and told me that he wanted to self-surrender.
On February 28, 2000, Pace arrived at the LA Federal Building in the company of his lawyer. He made no statement and refused to cooperate with investigators. Pace was arrested and held without bail. 4 of the robbers pled guilty to robbery and conspiracy. Eugene Hill was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Thomas Johnson received 10 years. Fred McCrary received 7.5 years, and Terry Brown got 8. The 6th gunman, Eric Boyd, fought the charges against him and was found guilty and sentenced to 17 years. After a 3-week trial, Alan Pace, who had orchestrated the armed robbery, was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Agents seized all of the criminals' assets. They were able to account for about $5 million of the stolen money.
So about $14 million remains missing. We don't know where that money is, how it was spent, if it was spent. We just have no idea.
But whenever the felons are finally released, the FBI will be watching.
No one drops a dime. Okay.
If they make any moves to recover hidden money, they'll go straight back to jail. In Alabama, a series of deadly assaults shocks the community and frustrates police. All the killers leave behind are the dead and fleeting images on surveillance videotape. Local police and federal agents follow the killer's trail up and down the eastern seaboard. The The shadowy fugitives keep running, but the FBI will not give up the chase.
Surveillance video is often the most precise witness to a crime. Its images can speak for victims when they are unable. After 3 brutal murders were caught on tape in Alabama, the suspects fled the area. They had an arsenal of stolen weapons and swore they wouldn't be taken alive. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Racing across several states, the fugitives tried to elude the FBI, and agents hoped to capture them without more bloodshed.
In the 1990s, Birmingham, Alabama saw a drop in both its population and its crime rate. But even in the safest cities, killers can strike. On May 18, 1996, a customer at a gas station discovered a body. Birmingham police responded to the 911 call. Crime scene investigators determined the victim, the station cashier, had been shot to death. He was the only employee on duty that day. The customer hadn't seen what happened to him. A trail of blood led back into the store and behind the counter. More blood there indicated the cashier lay briefly on the floor before going outside, perhaps hoping for help. He barely made it to the parking lot. Police first suspected a robbery shooting, but money was left on the counter, and the cash register had not been emptied. No fingerprints pointed toward a suspect, and no witnesses had seen anything. Investigators retrieved the store's security videotape and sent it to the police lab. The tape had degraded because it had been reused many times in the recorder. So the footage of the crime was blurry and few details could be seen. Police technicians tried to clean up the image electronically for detectives. The enhanced tape gave investigators a better look at the crime. It confirmed what the crime scene clues suggested. A lone customer shot the cashier, even though the employee was complying with his demands. It seemed he killed without reason. Technicians made video captures of individual frames and tried to enhance them in order to see the face of the perpetrator or any identifying characteristics. Birmingham police hoped to identify the suspect from the stills. Checking mugshots, they could not find a match. Detectives interviewed friends and relatives of the victim, trying to find some lead on the senseless murder. No one recognized the killer or knew who might want the cashier dead. Without any other evidence, the investigation stalled. 2 months later, and 20 miles south of Birmingham, a call came into the sheriff's office in Shelby County, Alabama. Sheriff James Jones received the report of 2 people downed at a pawn shop.
When we got the phone call, it really wasn't clear to us exactly what had happened. We had reason to believe that lives had been lost in the building. It happened so rarely in our county that I really was surprised when I got on the scene.
EMTs determined the pawn shop owner had died from multiple gunshots. A female employee was in critical condition with a gunshot wound to her head.
All other cars, when you're outside, make sure they...
The sheriff ordered deputies to stop any suspicious vehicles in the area.
We really didn't know what we were looking for at this point. But we was in hopes that our people would be sharp enough if they saw something that was out of place that they would be able to recognize that, stop that vehicle, and perhaps give us some leads from it.
Stabilizing her as much as they could in the field, the paramedics prepared the woman for the helicopter ride to the hospital. Authorities determined more than $2,300 in cash and jewelry was missing. And the gun cases had been nearly emptied. Since the pawn shop had frequent customers, it wasn't difficult for crime scene technicians to lift hundreds of latent fingerprints. Connecting one of them to the crime might be impossible. The lead investigator was Shelby County Sergeant Michael DeHart.
There was really a lot of evidence processing to be done, fingerprint dusting, so on, but we didn't find anything definitive as a result of that. The one thing that we did find that we did have were shell casings that were left at the scene.
The murder weapon was a .380 automatic handgun.
At the time, we didn't know if this was a one-time event that had occurred or if this was a part of a larger series of events.
The in-store shooting was similar to the earlier gas station murder, but this crime occurred during a robbery. Detectives checked for the shop's security video. Then they remembered something.
I was talking to the owner a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about putting a dummy machine in. He was talking about putting a real one over in this area.
Sergeant Russell Yawn found the other machine in the actual surveillance videotape.
The second, or the real VCR, continued to operate even after they took and unplugged and removed the tape from the dummy VCR. And it continued to record even until the time that I pushed the eject button.
The videotape showed 2 young men entering the store at 3:23 p.m. They cornered the shop owner, forcing him behind the counter with the female employee. Deputies spotted a red pickup truck barely visible outside the shop. It might be the getaway vehicle. The suspects looted the pawn shop for 13 minutes while the employees watched. They then shot the hostages, point blank.
We saw nothing that told us that these 2 victims resisted or attempted to resist. They were very compliant. And I'm sure they did that with the hopes that they would live. But instead, their life was taken by execution style. And that was very disturbing to see that.
What I don't understand is, this is just garbage.
Sergeant Yawn and his partner, Sergeant Donald King, found more evidence near the spot where the victims had been killed.
As we were doing our search at the pawn shop, we saw a small pile of garbage in behind the counter, and we noted it at the time. Why was the garbage there? There was no garbage can. It really didn't make a whole lot of sense at the time. There was also some metal filings on the floor mixed in with the trash.
The filings likely came from a key-making machine installed on the counter. Detectives collected them for later examination. They believe the killers took the garbage can, but they didn't know why. Federal law requires that anyone buying or selling firearms must keep records of the transactions. Detectives asked another employee to bring up the store's weapons manifest, comparing it to the guns still in the shop.
Yeah, I think this is,
They realized the suspects took an entire arsenal.
think that's it.
There were 32 stolen weapons in the hands of vicious killers.
We was very disturbed about what else would they do, what were they doing now, and what would they do again in the future.
Because of the potential for more violence by the heavily armed killers, sheriff's detectives immediately contacted the Shelby County District Attorney's Office. Prosecutor Randy Hillman joined the investigation.
We like to be in on the front end of any investigation. It makes things a lot easier for us. It makes things a lot easier for the police officers working the scene as well.
The surveillance videotape was the best evidence investigators had to find the killers. It showed the suspects carry out many of the stolen items in a guitar case. One of them shot both the shop owner and the employee. At one point, his gun jammed. Almost mechanically, he cleared and reloaded, and then kept firing. The two suspects got into the waiting red pickup, both on the passenger side. There must have been a driver, a third suspect. Technicians made photos from video captures, but the quality was poor.
We had photographs of these individuals actually doing the execution. We had a partial photograph of the vehicle that they were in, but we didn't know who they were. And the level of violence here was critical to us. I mean, we had to stop these guys before it happened again.
Less than 8 hours after the shooting, investigators learned the pawn shop employee died in the hospital. Now there were 2 innocent murder victims. Technicians at the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences examined the bullet fragments and casings found at the pawn shop. They compared them to those used in other area shootings, including the one at the Birmingham gas station, to see if the same gun was used. But the pawn shop bullets did not match any others. Still, investigators thought the 2 crimes might be related. They turned to the public for help.
We were able to distribute still photographs to the local media in the area, and we enlisted their assistance in getting the pictures out there to the public and to request assistance in identifying the perpetrators of these crimes.
They kept several aspects of the crime secret to help identify more reliable
What's
leads.
the address on Commerce Street? Okay.
The media exposure generated dozens of calls.
Okay, how many guys were there?
One caller said that while driving in Birmingham, he saw 2 men fitting the description of the pawn shop killers. They were carrying guns and a guitar case from a red pickup into a house.
Okay.
The detail of the guitar case had been withheld from the public.
Okay, great.
The caller said he knew the men, but only by their street names,
Okay.
Turkey and Maine.
Hey, Mike, we just got some
Shelby County detectives took the information to Birmingham police.
Got an informant calling with 2 guys loading up.
The Metro Department had a database on street names.
Teams about 6.
Turkey was an alias for 16-year-old Marcus Presley. He resembled the shooter in the pawn shop murders. Maine was 18-year-old LaSamuel Gamble. He resembled the second pawn shop robber. The 2 had long juvenile records.
Go into the areas where the information indicates.
Through court documents, they learned where Gamble lived.
We knew that the people that we were looking for were very dangerous men. They had killed before. We were afraid that they would kill again. And so when we undertook these searches, we wanted to use every safety precaution available to us, so we used tactical dynamic entries into the residences that we searched.
Sheriff's have a search warrant!
The arrest team cleared the house where Gamble had been living. No one was home.
Nobody in the house? Nobody?
A pair of cold-blooded killers with an arsenal of stolen weapons remained on the loose.
Everybody's inside. We'll set up a perimeter.
Okay. Thank you. Not seeing any movement?
On July 28, 1996, Alabama investigators searched for Marcus Presley, LaSamuel Gamble, and a third suspect believed to be involved in a double murder at a pawn shop. A tactical arrest team entered the house where suspect Gamble lived, but they found no one there. Armed with a warrant, detectives searched the house. Shelby County Sergeant Russell Yawn recovered evidence that directly linked the suspect to the pawn shop murders.
During the search, we found the videotape that came from the dummy VCR. It was destroyed, the case was cracked and broken, the tape pulled from the housing, and it indicated to us that they were aware that they were being recorded, and they had the presence of mind to stop and try to remove or eliminate all evidence of their crime.
They also found an empty guitar case. It appeared to be the one taken from the pawn shop. Sergeant Donald King found more evidence in the kitchen.
We were able to find a garbage can, and in the bottom of it had some labels, some price tags and so forth from some of the guns and some of the jewelry from the pawn shop. And it also contained some of the same metal shavings that we were able to tie back to the robbery scene.
Sergeant Michael DeHart was frustrated that they didn't find any of the 32 stolen weapons.
At the time that we did the search, we knew that 3 people were involved, but the third person we didn't know. When we did the search at the residence, we found a paycheck stub in a coat pocket that had the name Stephen McKenzie on it from a business in the Boston area. So paycheck stub.
Perhaps McKenzie was the third suspect who drove the getaway vehicle.
Dated fairly recently.
He had no local address, but neighbors said he was a friend of Gamble and Presley. Court records listed Marcus Presley as living with his grandmother.
There's nothing here that can directly be tied to the pawn shop.
Investigators searched that house too, but found nothing there that related to the crime.
That's 10 Forest, 1230 3rd Avenue West.
Presley's grandmother arrived home as they were executing the search warrant.
Yes, ma'am. We got a search warrant to search this residence.
Can I go in my house?
Not right now. We're doing an investigation of a robbery, but you can speak to these 2 people right here.
Ma'am, I'm Chris Curry with Shelby County Sheriff's Office. Do you
Detective showed her video captures from the robbery.
Tell me if you recognize any 2 people.
She admitted one of the men looked like her grandson.
Picture, if you would, and help us and tell me if you recognize anyone.
She had tried her best to raise Marcus, but he got involved with drugs and gangs and had been in trouble ever since.
Thank you very much. You've been very helpful. But again, I apologize for the inconvenience.
She said he would disappear for weeks at a time.
But it will take him a few more minutes to finish.
She was devastated to learn that now he was a murder suspect.
You are certainly welcome to sit on the porch if you like.
The suspect's apparently constant movement troubled prosecutor Randy Hillman.
They were young, they were mobile, they didn't have any home base that they operated out of like normal people have a home that they go to and from. They had several different residences that they would frequent.
Detectives canvassed the neighborhood where Gamble and Presley hung out, interviewing anyone who might know the suspects. Several people in the neighborhood said that lately, Gamble and Presley had been flashing jewelry and giving away guns to members of their street gang.
That's enough guns to supply an army.
Some said they heard the suspects were still in the area and offered addresses where the young men might be staying. The detectives checked all the addresses. Gamble and Presley seemed to have disappeared.
We had one last place that we wanted to look before going home that particular day. We were on the way back and the suggestion was made, let's ride by the uncle of LaSamuel Gamble. Let's ride by his house and just see if anyone's there. We did that, and when we did, we saw a red pickup truck that matches the description of the vehicle that was used in the robbery.
It had no plates, but they could see the vehicle identification number. The detectives noticed a Massachusetts parking permit in the corner of the windshield.
6802746.
They hoped Gamble's uncle would have information about the suspects.
Good afternoon, sir. I want to talk to you about that red truck on the side of your house.
The uncle agreed to answer their questions, but not at his home. He did not want to be seen with the cops. They took a drive so they could talk. The uncle told investigators that the truck belonged to Stephen McKenzie, a friend of his nephew. It was the same name as the one on the Boston pay stub. The uncle admitted that his nephew recently stayed at his house with McKenzie and Presley. The trio had cleared out several days ago. Sergeant Yawn believed the uncle knew details.
And at first he really didn't want to give us any useful information, but we continued, and he did admit that they had left town and they had gone to Boston.
A check of the red pickup's Massachusetts parking permit confirmed that the truck belonged to Stephen McKenzie, the suspected getaway driver.
Everything going okay?
Eventually, the uncle gave investigators permission to search his property. He suggested they look under the porch. There, police found a paint gun. The serial number on the gun matched one taken from the pawn shop. There was enough probable cause to impound McKenzie's pickup and process it for evidence. But the technicians did not find anything that tied it to the pawn shop robbery homicide. With the possibility that the suspects had left the state, Shelby County authorities contacted FBI Special Agent Jeff Newton.
They requested FBI assistance in locating suspects that they had identified as they believed to be responsible for this terrible crime. At that point, I got information from the case from the Sheriff's Department representative, realized that we had enough probable cause at that point to apply for a federal unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, or UFAP warrant.
The FBI re-interviewed the suspect's friends. They told agents Gamble and Presley were acting desperate and volatile, and that the pair had promised if the law ever caught up with them, they would not be taken alive. In Alabama, authorities struggled to find the men believed responsible for 2 robbery homicides. the state increased the reward for the capture of LeSamuel Gamble, Marcus Presley, and Stephen McKenzie to $100,000. FBI Special Agent Jeff Newton believed the suspects left Alabama for Boston.
Anybody who's a suspect in a double homicide is automatically rated at the highest priority. I immediately notified our Boston office, you got bad guys heading your way we believe or may already be there. I gave them lots of details, everything I learned from Shelby County pertaining to their level of violence, you know, what they look like. We were sending photographs, we were sending full physical descriptions.
At the Boston, Massachusetts FBI field office, Special Agent Joseph Altman received the priority call.
The three individuals were identified to us as vicious killers, that they had made claims to the effect that they would not hesitate to kill again, that they would not be taken alive, or that they would take the life of any law enforcement officer that attempted to stop them.
Birmingham agents also sent Boston a list of places they should investigate. One was the construction company where suspect Stephen McKenzie had worked. Agents went to speak with the owner.
Special Agent Daniel, this is Special Agent Presley.
The man said he had not seen the suspect in weeks. If McKenzie was in the Boston area, he had not made an attempt to come back to work. The owner had an employment record, but it did not contain any new address or other information that would help find the suspect.
Great.
Boston authorities staked out the other addresses that Birmingham had sent, including one of another uncle of LeSamuel Gamble. But they did not approach this house immediately.
We did not want to let on that we were surveilling this particular home. We wanted to allow at least one or two areas, homes in the area that they could return to.
After several hours, they spotted a man leaving the residence.
Looks like him, yeah. Radio back in and tell him that someone's coming out of the house.
It was not one of the suspects. They waited until they were sure he was alone and not being watched.
How you doing, sir? I'm Special Agent Daniel and Special Agent Forensic would like to ask you a couple questions if we could.
All right.
Do you live in that building?
He was hesitant to talk, but did say that neither Gamble's uncle nor the suspects were in the house.
No one's in there? Yeah, Marcus Presley.
But he had seen them.
Thank you very much. Again, we just have to ask you.
He told us that both Gamble and Presley had been staying at this location, but they had since moved out. He did not know where they moved to. We felt that this location was no longer vital in our investigation, so we obtained a search warrant and searched the home and did not discover anything of lead value.
Another address on their list was in Roxbury, a suburb south of Boston. An agent set up surveillance there. It meant more long hours with no promise of a payoff. On August 1st, 1996, the Boston FBI held a press conference.
We believe these individuals to be extremely dangerous, most likely armed. They're wanted in Alabama. We'd like to bring these individuals in.
They distributed wanted posters and asked anyone with information to call a special tip line.
Hey, guys. Hey, what's up?
The media campaign produced dozens of leads. One was an address outside Boston where alleged getaway driver Stephen McKenzie was said to be staying. There was no word whether Gamble and Presley were with him.
All right, let's go.
The tactical arrest team had to be prepared for a fight. They caught McKenzie off guard. But Gamble and Presley were nowhere to be found. The two fugitives remained free and on the streets with an arsenal of stolen weapons. In August of 1996, the Boston SWAT team arrested one of 3 suspects who had fled Alabama after 2 robbery homicides. The suspected getaway driver, Stephen McKenzie, was unarmed and taken in for questioning.
Good work, guys.
Investigators searched the house where he was staying. They found jewelry, later determined to be from the Alabama pawnshop that was robbed. They also recovered 3 weapons. Running the serial numbers of the guns, agents learned they were among the 32 weapons stolen from the pawnshop.
P38, yeah, right.
But nothing in the house indicated where LaSamuel Gamble and Marcus Presley were. Boston agents held McKenzie on a charge of receiving stolen property. They contacted prosecutor Randy Hillman in Shelby County, Alabama.
Immediately after receiving that telephone call, we got on a plane and flew to Boston to help the Boston investigators.
They hoped McKenzie could lead them to the elusive armed killers.
We knew the level of violence and the numbers of guns that they had and what a danger they posed to other people.
The Shelby County authorities interviewed McKenzie.
Mr. McKenzie, you know why we're here. Our major concern is that these weapons are going to get back out on the street, and someone else, innocent persons, are going to lose their lives.
They confronted him with the evidence they had. Hoping for sentencing leniency, the suspect began to talk.
We're sitting around or whatever and drinking, and we just decided, hey, let's do it.
He said that he, Presley, and Gamble planned the pawnshop robbery in mid-July. They drove by the shop to check it out.
Drive the car, you know, watch out, stay
Gamble said it would be a good place to rob. There were guns, jewelry, and cash inside, and no security.
I'm positive. It was guaranteed that, you know, no one would get hurt. It was just a in and out thing.
On July 25th, they returned in McKenzie's pickup. Gamble and Presley went inside while McKenzie waited. They were only supposed to grab the money and valuables. But then McKenzie heard shots. They took what they came for, then fled.
I have a hard time believing that you don't know where they are. I know we're right there close. We're real close to them. I still think that they're real close around here.
McKenzie said Gamble and Presley had run with him to Boston.
I mean, I don't know.
And that they might still be in the area somewhere.
I'm positive.
Investigators were unconvinced.
He's not telling us everything. He's going to back on us.
That's all right. We'll let him sit in it for a while.
But
He claimed that he did not know where they were at the time, which I don't know that he did. He did give us some information about where they had been staying, the different houses that they may have gone to, and some other information. I think Mackenzie held out on us. I think Mackenzie knew more than what he was telling us.
At trial, Mackenzie's testimony would be attacked. The prosecutor turned to the one unimpeachable witness, the surveillance video. He sent the tape to the FBI's audio and video processing lab in Quantico, Virginia. The task of cleaning up the footage fell to video program manager Dale Linden.
This tape was a VHS recording on a security system. It had, I would say, fairly poor quality as far as resolution. It had a backlighting issue where the camera was facing towards the windows. At some points, some of the people in this video scene looks like silhouette. As people moved around, the closer they got to the camera, the better images we were able to retrieve.
Focusing on the portions of video where the perpetrators were nearest the camera, Linden began enhancing the images.
Once we digitize these images, we will go through each one. And depending on what the problems are, we will apply different types of filter processes. In this particular case, the first thing we did was we did some contrast adjustments to make the images look brighter and focusing in primarily on the subjects. In this particular case, I felt that we did some improvement to get facial detail of the face and the weapons, and also their movements within the store itself.
The results strengthened the case against Gamble and Presley. Now authorities needed to catch them. The FBI continued their stakeout at a house in Roxbury, Massachusetts, where informants said the men might hide out. It was the best lead so far for FBI Special Agent Joseph Altman.
We surveilled this house for approximately 48 hours. The street information that we had was getting better and better all the time, that the individuals were holed up in this house. We thought that we saw movement in the house.
Are they ready? This is Special Agent Frasker. SWAT ready?
Field agents told the SWAT team to prepare for entry. Right before the go word was given, a man left the target house.
Excuse me, sir. Question to ask you? How you doing?
Agents believed it was Gamble's uncle. They knew he was on probation for a felony offense. In accepting probation, a person gives up his Fourth Amendment rights. He can be stopped and searched at any time.
Oh, that's what we want to find out. Why don't you put them in this procedure? Just all right. I don't care about your cousin. Gun!
Agents found a handgun.
This was one of the weapons that was actually stolen during the robbery in Alabama, one of the 32 weapons that were stolen. He told us that the subjects were no longer in this house. However, we felt that since he was related to the subjects and that he had a stolen weapon on him, that we could not take this information at face value. So Boston SWAT went ahead and made the entry.
Gamble and Presley had sworn never to be taken alive. So the SWAT team prepared for a shootout.
We felt that the only way that they were going to be extricated from the house was through force.
The tactical arrest team swept through the house, clearing each room as they went. No one was inside.
However, they did find some travel bags belonging to Presley and Gamble. Inside these bags were a couple of weapons, in addition to a photograph.
The photos showed the fugitives getting on a bus. The travel bags contained the shirts worn by Gamble and Presley at the pawn shop. Investigators also recovered one of the guns used in the pawn shop robbery.
Thank you, officer. Thank you very much. Come on. Come on, guys.
The uncle confirmed Gamble and Presley stayed at the house.
We found these pictures in there. Yeah, those are the guys. Who's that? Those are both of them?
He said they left on a bus for Virginia, where Gamble's girlfriend lived.
Yeah, they had guns. They had guns too? Okay.
The FBI and Boston police had missed the dangerous fugitives by a matter of hours. On August 5th, 1996, fugitives LeSamuel Gamble and Marcus Presley eluded an arrest team in Boston.
Found these pictures in there.
An uncle told agents the men had left for Virginia, where one had a girlfriend, but he did not know exactly where.
Okay, that's enough. Thanks.
To narrow the search, the FBI obtained the phone records of houses in Boston where the suspects might have stayed. For nearly 48 hours, agents combed through the records, looking for common numbers. According to FBI Special Agent Joseph Altman, they found one.
We did find a common phone numbers that occurred about 2.5 months before the murders took place and about a week after the murders took place.
The number was in the Norfolk, Virginia area. Boston agents contacted the FBI's Norfolk field office. On August 8th, Special Agent John Harley received word from Boston to apprehend the young fugitives.
Youth can be a factor in making somebody a little bit more unpredictable. If they're older and more set in their ways, they may even have a past pattern of conduct that we can look at and help us in apprehending that person. But with these two individuals, as young as they were, they proved to be very difficult because they were not predictable at all.
At 5:30 the next morning, the fugitive task force arrived.
You alone in there?
An individual came to the door who we weren't sure matched description or not initially, but we went ahead and detained him there at the door and asked if we could go ahead and consent to search his apartment, at which time he said we could.
Seen these guys? You haven't seen them before?
The resident recognized photographs of the suspects.
The individual who we talked to provided us information that he had had a party recently at his apartment and that two individuals matching the description of Presley and Gamble had come with a girl that he knew.
The place was empty, but the resident gave agents the girl's address.
Time is starting to tick by, and we then have to head over to try to locate this apartment where this girlfriend is apparently living, who's associated with the two subjects.
An arrest team quickly assembled outside the target apartment, a third-story residence. Norfolk police helped cordon off the area while agents assessed the building for entry.
It's now getting to be about 9 o'clock in the morning. The sun's up now, and we were getting concerned that if the two subjects were sleeping, that they weren't going to be sleeping for very much longer, and we would prefer to go in if they were obviously not awake.
The arrest team split into two groups and moved in.
We decided to make our main effort use the most people to go up the fire escape, which isn't the most conducive route, but it was the route that we thought offered the most surprise. We also then stationed two special state police agents on the front door, which would have been in the interior hallway, just to make sure that any bad guys didn't run out.
agents did not have the time to obtain a search warrant for the apartment. To get inside and make a legal arrest, they would have to see the suspects or get permission. They spotted a resident through a back window and took a risk.
We announced to him who we were and that we were looking for a couple of individuals and asked if he minded if we took a look around. This older gentleman then stepped aside, nodded, "Come on in," and that's when we made our entry.
They found Presley first.
We immediately handcuffed him and detained him.
He had no opportunity to warn his friend. In a rear bedroom, the team found Gamble. The agents positively identified Presley and Gamble from photographs and placed them under arrest. U.S. Marshals transported the fugitives back to Shelby County, Alabama. When questioned at the county jail, Samuel Gamble blamed Presley for the murders. When they spoke to Marcus Presley, he had a different story. Each believed they had destroyed the surveillance tape.
Presley and Gamble both still thought that there was nobody alive from the robbery who could say exactly what happened. They continued to point the finger at each other, saying, "He's the one that did it," or "It wasn't me, it was someone else," until they saw the videotape. Once they saw the videotape, they realized that no longer could they lie about it, that we had them actually doing the executions. And the whole tenor of the conversation changed then. Eventually, Marcus Presley, after pointing the finger several other places, Presley confessed and said that he did do the killing.
How about this?
Presley also confessed to another crime. He had been the shooter in the gas station murder in Birmingham. He said he thought the cashier was going for a gun, so he shot him. In 1997, the three suspects had separate trials. For his role, Stephen McKenzie received 50 years. An Alabama jury convicted Samuel Gamble of capital murder and sentenced him to death for being part of the Pawnshop slayings. Marcus Presley received the death penalty for killing the gas station cashier. Another jury sentenced him to death a second time for killing the pawnshop employees.
When the jurors saw this tape, they were shocked. People are used to seeing violence on television, and we've seen so much of it that you kind of become detached, that it becomes old hat to you. This was an actual videotape of two people being executed, and it had a profound impact on the jury. Actually, the owner of the pawn shop was an unwitting participant in the investigation of his own murder. By having the dummy VCR and putting that tape in our hands, showing the actual executions, he helped us solve this case a lot more quickly and with conviction, with absolute certainty. Whereas if we hadn't had this tape, it would have been a guessing game.
In the Midwest, the fugitive drug dealer will do anything to avoid capture. His desperate run is fueled by drugs and punctuated by gunfights. As he barrels across 2 states, local and federal authorities are determined to fight back and to stay in pursuit.
law enforcement officers become targets, no one is safe. So when a crystal meth dealer on the run from the law began shooting cops, it took more than police to stop him. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. With a fearless killer on the loose in the Midwest, residents had to help the FBI and state and local police bring down the dealer and deliver him to justice.
On February 2nd, 2000, on the quiet back roads of Lincoln County, Nebraska, Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Stan McKnight was on routine patrol when he saw a vehicle rapidly approach from behind. A maroon pickup truck sped past. McKnight spotted Texas plates on the pickup, but he could not make out the numbers. The deputy began cautious pursuit. Recent weather conditions had created black ice on the roads. Without the benefit of streetlights, the roads appeared normal, but were treacherously covered with patches of slick ice.
Subject is now turning off on the side
Deputy
road.
McKnight radioed for assistance.
Please alert all available units.
Several Nebraska State Patrol troopers mobilized to try to intercept the pickup. Whoever was in the truck seemed to have no regard for his own safety. Since the roads were free of other traffic and no one else was in danger, McKnight decided high-speed pursuit was not worth the risk.
It appeared as though he knew the area that he was in, and due to the fact that he would take more chances and drive faster than I would, he was able to disappear.
Eventually, the truck vanished into the night.
I had called in for assistance from the department, and all the deputies and state troopers are working, and we combed the whole area and looking for that vehicle, and it was to no avail.
Nebraska police issued a be on the lookout bulletin for the maroon pickup with Texas plates. But that night, no one spotted the vehicle or its driver. A week later, and 40 miles away in North Platte, Nebraska, deputies responded to a call from a farmer. He hadn't used his barn in years, so the farmer was surprised to discover someone had been working there recently, leaving a strange workplace behind. The deputies found chemicals and other items available in farm supply stores. They'd often seen this combination of materials in the area before. They were the ingredients needed to make methamphetamine, an illegal drug. A powerful stimulant, meth is also known as crank or speed. It's easy to make with materials commonly found on farms. In recent years, the Midwestern countryside has seen an epidemic of methamphetamine production, according to Lincoln County, Nebraska Sheriff's Corporal Casey Nelms.
Methamphetamine labs are a problem because it's such a rural area, a lot of abandoned farmhouses, farmsteads where people don't live anymore, gives opportunity for these people to go in and manufacture this drug pretty much undetected.
The drug is addictive and extremely dangerous. Users feel a temporary high, then intense paranoia and a craving for more. Most users become aggressive and desperate. When meth labs pop up in an area, violent crime follows. During their search of the meth lab in the North Platte barn, deputies found several pieces of mail. They were addressed to Charles Moses Jr. of Nocona, Texas. Deputies contacted Texas authorities asking for information on Moses. They received photos of Moses and learned there were warrants for his arrest for the theft of several firearms. Nebraska investigators also learned Moses drove a maroon pickup truck with Texas plates. The make and model of the truck matched the description of the one that had evaded Deputy McKnight only a week earlier. If Charles Moses was manufacturing methamphetamine, there was a good chance he was using it too. That might explain why Moses drove so recklessly on the night of the chase.
The people that use this become very paranoid. They have no pain threshold. Sometimes they're up for days, and they're just a real problem. They're hard to handle.
During their rounds in the tightly knit communities in the area, police showed the photo of Moses and asked if anyone had noticed an outsider fitting his description. Some residents reported seeing him in the past.
We were pretty sure that he was in the area.
But no one had seen him in several days, and Moses had no local address. At 11 p.m. on February 12, 2000, a week after the meth lab was discovered, Lincoln County Corporal Casey Nelms was about to start his shift. As was his routine, he picked up a cup of coffee before hitting the road. But that night would prove to be anything but routine. Through the window, Nelms spotted a vehicle that matched the description of Charles Moses's pickup truck.
Have a good night.
You too.
But he needed to get a look at the driver.
When he got out of the pickup, he resembled the individual that we were looking for.
The truck had Texas plates.
7216, 1089.
Nelms headed out to check the man's ID. But the man spoke first.
What the roads like out there?
They're pretty slick. Where are you heading?
Just kind of heading out. Just going out.
I approached him and asked him if he was where he was going and what he was doing. I asked him for his identification, and when he handed it to me, the name on the driver's license was Charles Moses. You're under arrest. I really expected that once I got a hold of him in the vehicle that I was going to be able to, take him out of the vehicle without any problem and place him under arrest, but he was just spectacularly strong. I just couldn't do anything with him, except just keep struggling with him to try to keep the weapon away from my face.
Moses fired.
Cars parking lot, shots fired. I was pretty sure 2 of my rounds hit. The second round I saw it hit the back of the cab, and the third round it also hit the back of the cab.
Nelms tried to follow Moses, but the fugitive drove with the recklessness of a man on methamphetamine and disappeared. Nebraska State Patrol officers heard the shots fired call and joined the search for the would-be cop killer. Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Stan McKnight, who had chased the maroon truck before, heard about the pursuit on the radio. He needed to position himself in a place where he was likely to intercept Moses.
There's an area that's commonly called the correction line. It's an area where I could see the best I thought possible 3 different roads intersecting that area. And that was the middle one. I could watch a mile behind me, that one, and a mile in front of me.
McKnight waited in the dark, hoping he was in the right place.
After about 10 or 15 minutes of sitting there, a vehicle did come from the west at the very road intersection that I was at. And as they got right to the front of my vehicle, I turned my headlights on and I saw the vehicle that was the same identical vehicle that I'd seen less than 2 weeks before. He was traveling in excess of 70 to 80 mile an hour, and being nighttime conditions, it was hard to see him, and he was out of distance me quite rapidly.
Deputy McKnight tried to maintain a visual of the pickup truck. But the vehicle seemed to disappear yet again. McKnight changed tactics.
At that point, he had pretty much, got ahead of me. At the same time, I had to slow down and check driveways and intersecting road intersections to make sure he hadn't turned off on me.
Then the deputy saw a vehicle's brake lights in the distance. It was idling at an empty intersection. Deputy McKnight called for backup. Moses had already fired at one officer. It was too dangerous for the deputy to advance alone. He waited for the backup officers. Before they came, Moses made his move. One bullet entered Stan McKnight's head. Another ripped through his hand.
Upon figuring out that I'd been hit by a bullet, I was going to try to call to the rest of the officers around to let them know what was going on. Only when I reached for the mic, I couldn't talk. My mouth was all full of blood and I was starting to choke. So I felt around and I found some napkins in the seat and I got them shoved up in my mouth to make the blood go out, and I got it spit out, and then I could talk and let them know that I'd been hit and that the subject had went on to the left and was going to be chasing him.
Despite his injuries, Deputy McKnight was not going to give up his pursuit.
The wind was coming through the holes in the windshield, blowing glass all over. My left eye was completely shut from blood. My right eye, I was just blinking, but I could still see enough of my headlights to keep going down the road.
Based on the coordinates McKnight radioed, several teams of Nebraska State Patrol troopers headed towards stakeout positions in the area. They drove with their headlights and flashers off so they wouldn't alert Moses. Troopers in 2 cars positioned themselves on a dark county road and waited. Minutes later, headlights appeared. It was Moses. One of the troopers spotted a gun. After firing a full clip at Moses, the trooper realized a bullet had torn through his bulletproof vest. He was losing blood fast. The chest wound appeared to be life-threatening. They called for an ambulance from a hospital dozens of miles away. In the dark prairie, the troopers hoped their fallen friend would survive. In a frantic escape, Charles Moses had shot both a sheriff's deputy and a state trooper. Though gravely injured, Deputy McKnight continued pursuit of Moses, a man willing to kill to stay on the run. In February of 2000, Nebraska authorities confronted Charles Moses, a Texas fugitive suspected of running a methamphetamine lab. Escaping, he led police on a high-speed chase, shooting one deputy in the head and a state trooper in the chest before vanishing into the night. Paramedics stabilized the wounded trooper. then transported him to the nearest emergency room. Helping to process the crime scene was Nebraska State Patrol Sergeant Lynn Williams.
We secured the area, and then our major concern was obviously the gathering of evidence. So we collected the trooper's service pistol, his duty and gun belt, spent shell casings that were still at the scene. We took 35mm photographs, videotaped the scene.
Moses had fired several bullets. One struck the cruiser's reflective seal, perhaps the only thing visible on the dark prairie.
The bullet had passed through the door of the trooper's patrol car, had struck the trooper in the abdomen, piercing his bulletproof vest, as well as traveling through his body.
To get through that much protection, the gun Moses used against police had to be a powerful one.
It was obvious that this was a high-powered rifle. We were looking for some sort of an assault rifle, something large bore, high-powered.
The state police brought the spent rifle slugs to their ballistics lab for analysis. Technicians there examined the size, weight, and metal composition of the slugs. They determined they were high-velocity rounds, most likely fired from a 7.62 SKS military assault rifle. Deadly weaponry designed for trained military personnel, something else entirely in the hands of a criminal. After the multiple cop shooting, the FBI joined the effort to capture Moses. Special Agent Ron Raywald took the call at the normally quiet North Platte, Nebraska FBI resident agency.
Our caseload primarily is in the area of white-collar crime, and it's not very common that we get called in to assist in investigations of violent criminal activity.
Agent Raywald gathered information to obtain an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant against Moses.
In this particular case, we anticipated that Moses would leave the state of Nebraska after he fled his arrest, and that the FBI could assist in locating him.
Hoping to catch Moses before he left Nebraska, authorities set up a command center at a state police barracks. Officers from virtually every law enforcement agency in the state shared intelligence on Moses. Several had had run-ins with him, usually in connection with clandestine meth labs.
He had a history of using abandoned farmsteads, farm places, not only for the manufacture of methamphetamine, but for hiding and living as well. So we knew that we needed to be aware of this and target those areas for a search.
Hundreds of police vehicles across the state mobilized, with officers looking for any sign of Charles Moses or his maroon pickup truck. In the sprawling rural landscape, finding Moses would not be easy.
Moses Jr. was last seen wearing a light-colored winter
Investigators also hoped the public would assist in the search.
1995 4x4 pickup truck with
Media bulletins urged citizens to avoid Moses and to call the police if they spotted him.
information. Call the special tip line.
In the small town of Dickens, Nebraska, 30 miles south of where the two officers were shot, a young farmer found tire tracks leading to a garage. His parents' car was usually inside. Instead, there was a maroon pickup truck. His parents' car was gone. Recognizing the truck from media reports, the farmer called police. The Nebraska State Patrol confirmed that the truck belonged to Charles Moses and that officers had hit the vehicle when returning fire.
The license plate that we were looking for was still displayed on the truck, which was registered to Mr. Moses. It had evidence that it had been shot at with a firearm. The bullet holes were in the back portion of the cab. They had shattered the back window of the cab. Some had lodged in the dash of the cab, and some had passed out through the front windshield.
Make sure you get this wheel.
Investigators also found evidence the suspect was wounded by at least one of the many shots fired at the vehicle.
We located human blood in the cab, the interior of the pickup. That led us to believe that possibly when the Lincoln County deputy had fired at Moses early on during the incident, that possibly he had been struck.
But if Moses was injured, he had the perfect drug to stay alert, pain-free and aggressive, to keep running without sleep.
There was a tremendous amount of paraphernalia located in his pickup that deals with cooking or the manufacture of methamphetamine. He virtually had a lab present in the back of the truck.
Investigators also found survivalist gear, police radios, and weapons in the truck. What they didn't find was the high-powered assault rifle Moses used to shoot 2 police officers. An hour after the pickup was found, and 60 miles northwest in Ogallala, Nebraska, the Nebraska State Patrol responded to a call from a man who said he was an acquaintance of Charles Moses.
He was in a car? I was wondering about you. I haven't seen you for a while. Yeah.
The man said he had seen Moses 15 minutes earlier. Moses spoke to him at a truck stop. He was in a car that matched the description of the vehicle missing from the Dickens farm.
So listen. Wanted in connection with the shootings of 2 law enforcement officers.
While they talked, Moses heard a radio bulletin that said police were looking for the vehicle.
If you see this vehicle, call state
I gotta
police
get out of here,
immediately.
He panicked and took off. The man said he had waited 15 minutes to call police because he was afraid at first. The dangerous fugitive knew where his family lived.
Okay, let's go out to my car.
Police worried Moses would change vehicles again to throw them off his trail. Two hours after the last sighting, and 20 miles south of the truck stop in Paxton, Nebraska, a farmer noticed fresh tire tracks outside a house on his family's farmstead, a house that was closed up and unused. He called his family to ask if anyone had been to the house. They hadn't, but they told him about the bulletins, warning of a dangerous fugitive in the area. They said he should leave the place immediately. A relative on the line heard the farmer talking to someone. The police would soon learn that Charles Moses had just claimed his first murder victim. The deadly fugitive was still on the run, now more desperate than ever. On February 14th, 2000, 36 hours after fugitive Charles Moses seriously wounded 2 Nebraska law enforcement officers, a murder investigation began in Paxton, Nebraska. The victim was a local farmer, killed while talking to a relative on his cell phone. The investigative team had to piece together the murder from crime scene clues. The circumstances indicated Charles Moses was involved, to Nebraska State Police Sergeant Lynn Williams.
We had learned that the victim had drove in the abandoned farmstead to check on tire tracks that he observed. We believed that he surprised Moses, and Moses reacted with that surprise and shot the victim, killing him. Moses then drugged the victim from the victim's pickup, placed him on the ground, and Moses then got back in the victim's pickup and left the scene.
Troopers found tracks consistent with those on the model of truck the farmer drove, as well as broken glass from the truck on one side of the driveway. The position of the glass suggested the vehicle's driver's side window had been blown out. FBI Special Agent Ron Raywalt knew the glass was an important clue.
I anticipated that Moses would try and use a defense of self-defense, stating that he was returning fire from someone shooting at him. I knew that I could determine how many shots were fired and the direction that the shots originated from. When a high-speed projectile hits a piece of glass and the glass breaks, physical characteristics are left in the glass. This answers questions for the crime scene investigator. It tells them which bullet hit first and the direction of travel of the bullet.
The glass would be examined later in the lab. Behind a barn on the property, investigators found the stolen car that Moses was last seen driving. The car seemed hastily abandoned. In the back seat, troopers found chemicals, knives, and several firearms. It appeared that Moses had switched vehicles after he heard a radio report that police were looking for this car.
It was very obvious that Mr. Moses had been attempting to hide or camouflage, conceal the vehicle. It had a tarp over it, and Moses was in the process of covering the vehicle with broken and dead branches, tree branches, and that sort of stuff.
Investigators found the victim's identification, but they couldn't find the cell phone he was using when he was murdered. They believe Moses had the phone with him in the farmer's blue pickup truck. They issued an APB for the vehicle and contacted cell phone companies to begin tracking the cell phone signal. While powered on, cell phones are constantly in search of the nearest tower to be ready for use. Police can flag a specific phone number and learn which tower is serving it. 2 hours after the farmer's murder was discovered, a cell phone tower in Oshkosh, Nebraska picked up the signal from the missing phone. But before police could respond to the location, the cell phone signal disappeared. The FBI also studied the glass fragments from the farmstead crime scene.
I was able to determine that one bullet had been fired from outside the truck into the truck, and that the bullet thereafter passed through the truck. My examination further disclosed that no shots were fired from inside the truck. This was not self-defense. This was murder.
Take a look at this.
With the farmer's murder and the theft of his pickup truck, the FBI issued another federal warrant against Charles Moses.
The facts of the case had changed significantly, and I was able to change the warrant application process to charge Mr. Moses with the federal carjacking statute with a homicide.
Lock their doors.
With Charles Moses crisscrossing the state, armed and out of control, Nebraska Governor Mike Johans held a news conference to warn the public.
This is a situation that we need to get through.
Police are seeking Charles Moses.
It was clear the fugitive was ready to kill civilians to get what he wanted.
He's considered armed and dangerous.
That evening, 80 miles to the west, near the Nebraska-Wyoming border, an elderly woman was enjoying a quiet evening. She heard someone breaking in through a door. She could hear an intruder walking through the house, then approaching her bedroom. It was too late to escape, so she did her best to hide. The evening news had said Moses killed the last resident he surprised. It sounded like he was looking for something, and then left. The woman was unharmed and called police from a neighbor's house. She explained that she never saw the man's face. But deputies from the Scottsbluff, Nebraska Sheriff's Department found tire tracks consistent with those on the pickup truck stolen from the murdered farmer. They also recovered automotive glass near the left tire track. Its position suggested it came from the driver's side window. The window investigators believe Moses shot out while killing the farmer. Local officers contacted the FBI about the new development.
From the facts of the case and the type of glass left at that crime scene, it was obvious that Moses had been involved in that burglary and that he was traveling in a westerly direction.
Moses, and we got his physical description.
With Charles Moses believed to be near Nebraska's western border, the FBI notified Wyoming law agencies that a killer might be headed their way. The small town of Lusk, Wyoming, is 20 miles from the Nebraska border. At the Lusk Police Department, Chief Gary Gill received the FBI bulletin.
That morning, we heard about Charles Moses from our dispatch. We knew that he was driving a Nebraska pickup truck, blue in color, and that he could be headed in any direction.
The Wyoming media warned the public about the fugitive. Around 1 p.m. that afternoon, the media alerts paid off.
We heard about the call from a truck driver who had called into dispatch and was relayed to our office that possibly that pickup truck Charles Moses was driving was at the south end parking lot of the truck stop here in Lusk.
Assistant Chief Dusty Chrisman responded to the scene along with Chief Gill. Several vehicles in the parking lot fit the description. Officers knew one of them might hold a murderer who also tried to kill 2 policemen.
We were looking at license plates. We spotted a blue pickup that had matched the description.
The plates matched. It was the truck.
We decided to try to block him in if we could.
The officers approached from opposite directions. Someone was inside, but the officers couldn't tell if it was Moses. The truck's driver's side window appeared to be missing. If it was Moses, he might have finally come down off a long and haggard methamphetamine binge. Chief Gill called for backup and waited for more units to arrive.
This would be the vehicle I think we're looking for.
Then, the driver woke up.
He's waking up, he's gonna take off.
But Assistant Chief Chrisman couldn't risk firing because from his perspective, he did not get a good enough look to be absolutely sure it was Moses. It meant another chase.
Our biggest fears during the chase is when Moses turned onto Main Street and headed north. We knew he was going to be traveling through our business district and more than likely a high rate of speed. And also the fear of maybe losing him once he got through the city limits and headed north on Highway 85.
Weeks after Charles Moses' violent spree began, law enforcement once again had him in their sights. After eluding Nebraska authorities and the FBI, suspected murderer Charles Moses had crossed into Lusk, Wyoming. Lusk police were in pursuit. But Moses had a lead on him and never hesitated for a moment.
Mr. Moses finally got away from us off Highway 85 onto our ranch road. The road was very rutted up. Our small vehicles with two-wheel drive could not keep up with him in four-wheel drive in the pickup he had. He went down to a ranch place and across a old dam and up into the pastures through fences and things where we couldn't chase him.
Authorities lost him again. So Lusk police teamed with the Niobrara County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Samuel Reed helped devise a 10-mile perimeter to contain Moses.
The perimeter was a very large area. We were fortunate in one way. It sat kind of in the middle of three major highways, and we had another county road that dissected it basically in the middle.
But they couldn't rush in.
We were unsure what his actions were going to be, so we stayed back a ways knowing that he had a high-powered rifle.
Every law enforcement officer in the area, including fish and game wardens, manned roadblocks to look for Moses and warned travelers to stay away from him. They also met with residents living in the 10-mile perimeter, asking them to stay vigilant and call police at the first sign of any suspicious activity.
I had a very deep concern that if we did not apprehend Moses before it got dark, that we would have a terrible, terrible time finding him. I knew the ranch people that were there. I was very, very concerned for their safety of him entering the house at gunpoint, taking them hostage and shooting them and taking a vehicle and leaving the area.
All right, thanks, sir.
Although Moses was somewhere within the 10-mile perimeter, the terrain made it too dangerous for deputies to go in on foot. Without body armor and tactical training, they would be vulnerable to ambush or a sniper attack.
For officers to go in there would have been extremely difficult. There are a lot of deep draws, pine trees, ravines that he could get down in. It would have been very, very, very difficult to go in there and find him.
Thanks.
Special Agent Ron Raywald helped Wyoming authorities with the FBI's federal resources.
The Wyoming office of the FBI brought in 2 aircraft to assist in the search on the state highways and the rural roads, trying to locate the vehicle Moses was in.
Flying a grid pattern over the area, one of the aircraft spotted the truck Moses was last seen driving. It looked like it was stuck in a ravine. A SWAT team from the Nebraska State Patrol was airlifted to the area. Moses was armed with a high-powered rifle. The SWAT team had to move cautiously, man by man. An aggressive fugitive on powerful drugs could be behind any tree, ready to kill. They positioned themselves above the pickup, but they had no visual of Charles Moses. He might be watching them, waiting for a clean shot. They had to start their search from the truck. To stun and distract anyone near it, they fired a flashbang percussion grenade. He wasn't there. They found footprints in the mud by the truck and began following them. But in the trees, the trail went cold.
He had eluded us, the people that were right on the scene. He had eluded a SWAT team that had been flown in out of Nebraska.
That night, Moses would surface again. At 8:30 p.m., rancher Jim Kramers and his son Justin heard their dog barking at something behind the house. They knew about Moses, so Justin went out armed. Someone was out there.
I've got a gun. Don't go any further.
From the brief look, they believed it was Moses. The gunman had to be stopped.
Justin, take your rifle, go around back, get on the back side of him, and then you do what you have to do. Okay?
Kramers was unarmed, in a standoff with a desperate fugitive who had never hesitated to use violence. The rancher had a plan and hoped it would work. In eastern Wyoming, a rancher and his son found fugitive Charles Moses on their property. From media reports, rancher Jim Kramers knew Moses was wanted for shooting several police officers and killing a farmer for his truck.
Justin, get on the back side.
Justin Kramers went to cover Moses from the back. The father risked his life, hoping to end the fugitive's rampage without more violence.
I was totally unarmed. Moses had a rifle and a large caliber pistol in his hands.
Hoping his son could protect him if his plan failed, Jim Kramers offered Moses a deal. He knew the fugitive had been exposed to the day's cold rain showers.
And put it there by that wheel.
If Moses put down the guns and came inside, the rancher would give him a hot meal and throw his clothes in the dryer.
This was a plan in my head that if I got him in the house, I had nothing to fear from him because we would know that he had no weapons. It was too cold, and if he ran out of the house without any of his clothes with him, why, he was not going to be in good shape. I very seldom invite someone into my house that I don't ask them to eat, so I knew he was hungry, so I said, let's have something to eat. Oh, that's the only way we're going.
If they got him inside, they would try to call the police without him knowing. By this time, Justin Kramers had Moses in his sights. It looked like Moses was going for it. Then he tensed.
All right, I put my rifle down now. Where's the other guy you're with?
Right behind you.
Jim Kramers hoped Moses would not draw his son into his violence.
My greatest concern throughout the ordeal was that my son would not have to shoot someone. I didn't want him, justly or unjustly, I did not want him to have to go through life knowing that he had killed a person.
If it did turn violent, Justin could not waver.
Justin!
One of the fears I had was if I did have to shoot at him that I might miss. I only had one shot while he had up to 6 in his pistol, where I had a single-shot rifle.
After weeks of a methamphetamine-induced rampage, Charles Moses finally slowed down.
All right, let's go on into the house. We'll get you food.
He left his weapons outside.
I never actually lowered my rifle. I brought it down a small ways, but within quick enough time enough that I could have brought it back up to put on him if I needed to.
Inside the warm house and out of his wet clothes, Moses concentrated on his first hot meal in days.
I was able to go out the front door of the house and was gone for around 5 minutes while I called the sheriff from my brother's house, and then I was able to come back in the same door while he never realized I was gone.
What's going on, Jim?
A Lusk police officer and a Wyoming game warden were there in minutes. Because of the Kramer's plan, the wild, deadly fugitive had nothing to fight with. After a staggering chase across hundreds of miles, filled with burglary, carjacking, gunfights, and murder, Charles Moses Jr. was finally in police custody. As they theorized, Moses had been wounded by Nebraska deputies.
Come on.
At a Cheyenne, Wyoming hospital, Moses was treated for a bullet wound to his shoulder, dehydration, and exhaustion. The drugs he had taken, and the police relentlessly on his trail, had run him into the ground. FBI Special Agent Ron Raywalt arranged for Moses to be transported back to Nebraska.
The morning after the arrest, when I drove to Cheyenne, Wyoming, I took a lieutenant with the Nebraska State Patrol with me, and I took Deputy Casey Nelms with me, the individual that had attempted to initiate the arrest originally. The purpose of taking these two individuals with me was so that when I returned to Nebraska with Moses, both individuals could effect the respective warrants that they were carrying. The lieutenant from the patrol arrested Moses for the violation of shooting a Nebraska State Patrol trooper, and Casey Nelms arrested Moses for the murder of the farmer as well as the assault by shooting of the two deputies from Lincoln County.
Moses initially fought the charges against him. But when confronted with ballistics and other forensic evidence, he plea bargained to avoid the death penalty. Charles Moses Jr. pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and 2 counts of assault on a police officer. He was sentenced to 190 years in prison. The state trooper Moses shot returned to light duty in June of 2000. Moses had also shot Lincoln County Sheriff's Deputy Stan McKnight in the head and hand. He spent nearly 2 months in the hospital. Never willing to give up, McKnight was determined to return to his regular patrol.
I had to go back for several different operations, with a total of 9 operations and 23 months of continuing therapy. After the doctors had stated that they had done all that they could for me, I was checked and we went through all the physical dexterity, and I was able to go back to work and maintain and do what I was doing before.
Methamphetamine has become the biggest drug problem in the Midwest. Law enforcement there are dedicated to fight it, whatever the cost.